Thank you. And above all, thank you to Janet Hull and the IPA for asking me to set the scene today. And I'm going to take inspiration really from the chairman's structure, which is I'm going to give you some evidence, some learning, and some magic. So let's see. Here we go. Okay. So first of all, the magic and indeed the evidence. So UK consumers are among the most avid consumers of all forms of very high quality content, whether offline. This country, if you want to know where all the box sets come from, they come from the literature of this amazing country and how it exports so well. But in terms of online phenomena, the UK has basically been at the forefront of adoption of every single thing you can think of for about 20 years. And this is really across the piece. I mean, we look at older demographics as well, being very, very keen adopters of all forms of technology to enable consumption of new forms of content. We have an incredible richness of subscription models in this country, demonstrated on this slide by, for instance, the silos of music and online games and obviously video, in terms of particularly Netflix, which leads the market, but also Amazon. In terms of news apps, we have an extremely devoted group of subscribers here. And to add to the many encomiums of the FT group, may I just point out that this extraordinary phenomenon has 1 million subscribers around the world. So our culture exports and also is very, very broadly consumed. And I think that this is one of the reasons why we have always had such an extraordinarily high quality advertising market, and the requirement to innovate in content in terms of how advertisements are served, because they sit and are juxtaposed with some of the most beautiful material, and they compete directly with all of the stuff that's on YouTube and all the stuff that's on Netflix and all the stuff that's coming down the pike from Disney, Apple, and Uncle Tom Cobley. So as a result of the extraordinary and ferocious competition for everyone's attention, the UK has also led the world in terms of use of time. So, in fact, the UK is the world's leading e-commerce market per capita and has been since its inception. For some reason, 20 years ago, everyone took to it, and in fact, we've seen very, very consistent broadening of the group of e-commerce adopters here. And that's also because the UK has, apart from one period in the last 20 years, benefited from the most exceptional employment profile. And this is one of the reasons why, even in another historic week, another Brexit week, another potentially catastrophic series of outcomes, which I don't think are going to happen, but notwithstanding that, one of the reasons why the UK remains a very, very dynamic place is because its economy is among the most dynamic, its people are among the best employed, and there are those who search and who will find the most attractive options for everything, including for purchases. So we've seen a very steady progression, not just obviously in the core phenomenon of Amazon, but also in the willingness of all British firms of any major quality and all British brands to attack the online market and develop very significant e-commerce applications. And this is an extraordinarily progressive and dynamic change, and one which is fundamental to the future, because we're looking anyway at a world which is more and more conscious of its carbon footprint. And one of the curious things about e-commerce is that it helps to solve some of those problems for people who don't want to get out so much. The backbone of the UK's digital economy is in fact not US tech giants, but about 800,000 net new businesses which have developed in the last 15 years. And these businesses are around between 10 and 20 or even bigger companies, and they have been responsible for the major wave of employment and new employment that we've seen in the UK. There are also about 2 million new businesses over this period, which are also advertisers on Facebook, and some will one day become advertisers on Google. But this is an extraordinary transformation, and one I wish on every single country, because this is the necessary transition through this core industrial revolution, and we all can all see it happening, and we all know that it is going to happen. In fact, my daughter, who's age 30, has a job that didn't exist when she was 18, or indeed when she was 25. And I think that will happen to many, many people, and it's a constant source of optimism. Okay, let's just see if this is, okay, sorry about that. Within this, and this extraordinarily vibrant ecology of choice, and not just dominated by several vendors of an American type, we really have seen the development of all forms of phenomena of connecting directly with consumers. In fact, if you think of it as what is the core theme of this century, it is direct to consumer. Every single business wishes to move from intermediaries to direct contact with consumers. In fact, the amount of data that these businesses create, and in fact, the fact that they don't even coalesce or match or anything is one of the puzzles of being in your business. It's really which pools of data you trust. But essentially, we've seen this extraordinary granularity of the direct-to-consumer world develop, enabled by technology. But that actually has also coincided rightly with the maintenance of a brand ecology. Why? Because brands actually have incredible durability, and also because in a demographic phenomenon like the UK, where you see a great deal of extension in people's lives and the average age is actually 42, brands have value for many, many people and will end up by having value for young people too. And interestingly, of course, for all of you who have ever been told that people don't switch brands past the age of 30, that was probably true when people dropped dead at the age of 60, but it isn't true when people drop dead at the age of 90. So I promise you, you see enormous amounts of brand switching, and particularly among females, which are a group which advertisers have a great deal of negative bias against. So I'm just pointing out that actually this ecology has also risen because our consumption has risen. And one of the phenomena that we find so fascinating about the UK is there's no zero-sum game. Consumption options add to other consumption options. It's extraordinarily competitive to get through. It's extraordinarily competitive to stay in the game. And luckily, the phenomenon of all these choices for advertising and for content choices for consumers have resulted in a situation where, broadly speaking, it has been possible to maintain the quality of all the choices that are available to consumers. And that's because businesses can transition their models. So you've seen a lot of cannibalization of advertising, which was once in national and regional press. However, many of those phenomena have become more based on subscription, have raised cover prices and so on, and we still have one of the most vibrant democracies in the world. I think that the most concern that I would point to is the end of the chart since 2016. One of the effects of Brexit has been to take all the growth out of television, because the growth in consumption has been very, very muted. We've been rocking along pretty much the bottom of our consumption profile ever since Brexit, and in fact, referring to it as a kind of a Brexit-induced TV recession is not wrong. But there are also other phenomena going on at the same time, and the direct vectors of Netflix and YouTube are eating through all layers of the audience slowly but surely. That does not mean that TV is not the most effective medium. It is the most effective medium for the brands that it is most effective for, and that remains the case because, in fact, as we all know, it is the only locus of a mass audience of any measurable quality, and it also has the most well-established currency, the most reliable currency, and also, I would say, as someone who's very dispassionate about all media, it is the one that is most respectful of the country that we really are, not just because we have a public service broadcasting system whose regulations go across the piece from Sky to ITV to Channel 4, but also because the regulations force the broadcasters to correctly portray women, people with disabilities, different social classes, BAME. So the mirror of our country is on public service broadcasting as we know it, and it is the future that I have always wanted to be part of as an immigrant. There is no regulation of that type around Netflix, around YouTube, around Amazon, around Disney Plus, around any of these phenomena. And I say this because all advertisers must always remember that their beautiful content has to sit in a safe environment too. And it has to sit in an environment which never denigrates any fellow citizen, because the greatest brand damage is when there's a harm from that advert. And that is very, very important to understand about why television broadcasting is always going to be sustained, because it is a unique way of getting across values that are progressive, kind, generous, and democratic. So that is why I will be fighting for public service broadcasting for the next 10 years in the teeth of politicians who tell me we don't need it anymore because we have Netflix and YouTube. And I'm just going to say it is just completely to misunderstand what people are really doing and what they really want and the richness of the choices that they want. And I think that this chart fits very nicely with what I've just said, because it shows the absolute dominance in the UK of two core brands, which we've always seen are the ones which can innovate, which have scale. You know, they're not the most efficient companies, but they are the most effective at what they do. And of course, they are, both of them, the backbone of these two extraordinary industrial phenomena that I was describing. One, the rise of the self-employed and the very small business, the micro business, of which there are about 2 million advertising on Facebook, and the rise of the digital businesses and the other businesses, which together form the backbone of Google's extraordinary support for e-commerce in this country and for its distributed benefits. So Google has about 650,000 advertisers. These are not only some of all the new ad companies that I've mentioned have come into existence, but every single other major company. So this is actually a very efficient way for the UK to progress along the vector of the Industrial Revolution, but it is one which leaves most of the other businesses in a bit of a struggle for existence. But, you know, as I've said, my firm, my eminent colleague Douglas, has helped many, many news businesses survive, and we are always able to find clever ways to make it through. But this is a difficult picture for those of us who believe, as I do, in cultural sovereignty. I have to point it somewhere else. Here we go. Anyway, this chart just really summarizes the combined effect of Netflix's arrival in this country in 2012 with that of the pre-existing pretty strong performance from YouTube, which has continued. So these are really the two core phenomenon that since the 2012 Olympics have slowly but surely decimated young audiences in particular. And I say that only because what is so interesting, and I'm going to say it just the once now, is that when you see a result where 50% of viewing of children aged between 4 and 10 is on YouTube and Netflix combined, and you realize that none of those children should be allowed to watch YouTube and Netflix unless they're under complete parental supervision, you see the picture. We have a world here where parental controls are not applied by the parents, and they're not pushed. So we do have what I would call a huge amount of rogue viewing, particularly by under 16s, and a constant debasing of certain phenomena, certain phenomenology of childhood, in particular around exposure to violence, pornography, and inappropriate material. And unfortunately, although the PL the Premier League is able to take down any illegal content posted on YouTube within 15 seconds, just try that when an 8-year-old has already viewed a piece of pornography. So, to my mind, the challenge for these extraordinary businesses is to fit in with our culture and our values and to accept regulation that brings the whole online phenomenon closer to our educational and societal goals and also reduces the asymmetry between regulated content, newspapers, magazines, broadcasters, anything where there is a duty of care on the consumer who will consume, and imposes that duty of care on any major phenomenon in this country. Now, I'm asking for heaven, but I hope it will come in order to protect those who cannot protect themselves, which is children and the parents who don't seem to be able to apply parental controls. Any parents in this room who don't know how to apply them, please learn. Your children will have better educational outcomes. Anyway, that's it for the advert for parental controls. Now, one of the phenomenon which is going to increase the impact of SVOD is going to be the arrival of more services next year. We're going to see Disney Plus and Apple launch also, but also there will be potentially HBO, a number of others. However, one of the interesting things about the UK, and again, I say this only because I have heard about 50 times a year since Netflix launched that pay TV would just simply fall over, that the iPlayer would fall over, that Netflix would sweep all before. Why? Because of the expenditure which is being applied to this market. The US capital markets are causing an avalanche of material to be made for the world and dropped on this market, and some of it is being made for here as well. But you can see that the green refers to the UK broadcasters plus Sky, with the sort of hatched bit being the sport element, because the UK has this extraordinarily significant expenditure on sport as a result of competition between BT and Sky. But you can see that, you know, we've gone from a situation in 2014 where you could see that the broadcasters were somehow still ahead of the game, to one in which this avalanche of investment is basically taking away audiences. Now, what that has meant is a very simple thing. Broadcasters in this country can't waste a penny. They don't have access to those capital markets. The BBC can borrow £250 million in its whole charter, which is 12 years. Whereas I'm sure you know that's what Netflix borrows every week. So actually we're in a situation where this asymmetry, this tsunami is not going to go away. And by the way, this tsunami, the doubled tsunami of YouTube, which makes no money and is structurally loss-making, and structurally loss-making subscription VOD services, well, that combination is in every market in the world. So one of the things that's going to unite everyone in this room is you're dealing with a world of completely subsidized, dumped material in your markets, which is going to make fundamental changes in viewing patterns from which we will not go back. Fundamental changes. Give you an idea, in Europe, in the UK, in every single market in Europe, and probably eventually elsewhere, certainly in the US today, around 40% of all mobile bandwidth and fixed line bandwidth is occupied by YouTube and Netflix, neither which adequately pay for these services and this transport. So we're looking at a dominant situation of these two phenomena, and I think it's very unlikely that any SVOD services are going to make a dent in it, particularly as these phenomena are structurally loss-making. So as advertisers looking out onto this landscape, you're really looking at a situation where there are only money-making models in the traditional business pools. And that is, I think, somewhat perplexing and possibly, certainly frightening in terms of what you think that consumers should have access to in terms of choice. Because loss-making models may not be focused. I mean, indeed, Apple is prepared to spend $6 billion a year, Amazon $6 billion a year. Everybody seems to have $6 billion a year to spend on this, except for the UK broadcasters. So I think that just to summarize the issues ahead, I think we're going to see this complex struggle for audiences continue and become much, much more significant. We're going to see obviously a growth in loss-making models taking more share in the market, particularly SVOD models in the UK, we're going to have to see some kind of meshing of the existing credible sources of understanding of audiences, those supplied by the newspaper organizations, the TV broadcasters through Barb and ThinkBox. And we're going to have to see that meshed with the data pools that are emerging and that are very significant from Google, Amazon, and Facebook, and Apple. And to my mind, this is a priority for advertisers as a whole, because in fact, we're never going to see the withdrawal of any element of the choice that people have in the UK. Anyway, thank you very much.